Good evening, everybody. Um, like a good team of citizens of India, we don't know who is handling the show today, except we know that BIC is in the broader sense of the term. Thank you so much, BIC, at the start itself. Uh, it's been suggested that I explain to you, because this is not Calcutta but Bangalore, what the title of the book refers to, and more importantly, what this book is about. So, allow me 5 minutes of speaking before my colleagues take over and discuss the book from their point of view. And right in the beginning, because that's not going to be my job of thanking them, uh, I must thank Paronjoy for having had the courage to publish this book. It takes a lot of effort, and he's not purely a professional publisher, so I must thank him. I must also thank Jayna, who really is a true lawyer and fights cases which are very difficult to fight for the citizens of India. Thank you both for being here today, for helping me with my uh, launch of this book. The idea of this book came to me about 4 years back when two things happened. One was the COVID, and frankly, we just could not go out. I could not, and in this book I've mentioned this, that I could not even go out to a library to locate papers. I couldn't even go to one of the club libraries nearby because those were all closed during the COVID time. But I was able to use the online uh, material which helped me to write the book. And what I have done, and I may go back and forth a bit on this, but in this book of 450 pages or so, there are about 950 references. And I know that Paranjoy was tearing his hair, what he has left of it, uh, in trying to work on those, on the accuracy of those footnotes. And it's difficult because, and I'll explain as we go along why it was difficult, but these footnotes indicate the attempt to be correct and be honest with the facts that are put down in the book as I have seen it. I was born in 1948 in independent India, and therefore it made a lot of difference to me when I half understood my father telling me about the times when they would have to go to the British sub-collector and talk about getting a bat ball, and the British sub-collector would say, "Don't say bat ball, say cricket." Now, those were the days when he wasn't sent to jail because he was told later on by somebody that because he was from one of the important families, as it were, from the small town, his going to jail would have been awkward for the Brits over there. So this is how politics grew and management of politics grew in British times, which is what half this book is about. But let me go back to the Queen of all nations. What you heard as you came in was a song sung in the original Bengali, which is, for those who are Bengali here, Shokol Deshe Rani, the Queen of all nations. This song was written in 1905 by somebody called D.L. Roy, Dwijendra Lal Roy, who was a poet in Bengal around the same year, same time as Tagore. In 1905, the partition of Bengal happened, and as the then Home Secretary of India, this Britisher, said, Bengal together is a strength. Bengal divided is weak. And so they decided to divide Bengal in 1905, I think 14th of October or 15th of October, around that time. And since then, Bengal remained divided in many, many ways, but that's again a long story which is not for now. That comes up later in this book. So when in my introduction, I have given the first few lines of this song, which is actually a song which he wrote, and I've done the English translation myself. Filled with riches, grain, and flowers, there is here this earth of ours. There is a land in it, the greatest of them all. It is created in our dreams. It is bound by recall. You will not find another land like ours on earth. She is the queen of all nations, the land of my birth. Now, and it goes on at the end, in Bengal of that time, which was his nation, and East Bengal and West Bengal. And by the way, in Bengal, like some other parts of Karnataka, where you have the Kalyan Karnataka and the southern Karnataka, you have much bigger differences in Bengal between East Bengal and West Bengal, whether it is the football of East Bengal and Mohun Bagan, or Irish match at one end and Chingri match at the other end. But these are all differences that did not exist at a certain point in time before 1905. Now, what was the other reason? This is COVID. I had really nothing much to do. But what was the real reason for my writing it? Because by that time, around 2019, 2020, we had seen the distortions in the media that plagued our country, and today it's getting worse by the day, by the hour. We can't imagine what the state of our country has become. In the World Press Freedom Index, we are at 139 or something out of 150 or 180 or worse, I think now. This is the state of our country. And when I found that there was this problem with the truth as I knew it, I thought I should put it down. There was talk by then that Nehru, who was our first Prime Minister, would be removed from certain textbooks in North India. I don't think anybody thought of removing him from the southern texts. But in North India, there was some talk about removing Nehru. And I said, look, Nehru, he is the person whom we all admired. I mean, we knew no other prime minister then, as I grew up in school. And even when the Chinese aggression happened, or when he passed on, when the Chinese aggression happened, we still thought of him as somebody who was our leader. And then when he passed away, I had not seen the death of Mahatma Gandhi, but with Nehru, I know how we felt as we listened to the radio and heard, no TV then, but heard of the procession that went by to the cremation grounds. So as a Midnight's child, I thought I should keep on record what I had seen. It's not been easy because, as you know, in these times, it is difficult to record the truth in times of post-truth. But this is truth as I have seen it. E.H. Carr speaks of truth and says in his book, What is History?, that history is based on what you see in your way, at your moment of time, and everybody has his or her own way of looking at history. So I thought I should write about my land and keep it on record. So this is not a history textbook, though, and I've said that in my book, it is not a textbook. It is a book about the history of our land, but it is not written by a professional historian. I did not study history in college, except by the time I went to Mussoorie, before I went, I studied a lot of history, but even then, not Indian history. But I thought I should read, and I had so little knowledge of Indian history before this that even today I can't say that I know anything about Indian history, but it helped me to read, and I read, and I found that it's one of the most fascinating things I've done, reading about Indian history, not as the way the English had written it, but the way I read it in the journals of Indians writing about it in today's time. When when London was burning with the great fire of London, the recording of that was done at that moment, and that is why we have records of, say, the fire of London. In India, we don't have sufficient writing about ourselves, about our times, and I thought I should try and do a bit of this. So, what does this book talk about? And what are the broad trends that emerge in the book? I'm not sure when you read it. Some of you may have already read it or started reading it. Many of you, I hope, will go home with a copy and read it over the next few days and maybe write to me if you have any comments. But what is the most important thing of modern India? I think it was a unification of the nation. There are people here in this room from at least 20 different states of the country, I'm sure, and each of us speak different languages. But the very fact that I am speaking in English today and you are all are able to understand me in English is because that unification came about because the British landed in India in the 17th century and then slowly took over the reins of our government. Now, so what is this? 565 nations, as I can, using the word nations in inverted commas, is what we had before 1947. And in 1947, with independence and with the effort to unify the country, we did come together as a nation. And frankly, the issues that go into the making of this country through the Constitution of India, I would request in time for Jayna to tell us a little about that. But we also, before independence, in the 19th century, grew into a world which was not ours. We were all people, the princes and the people, the pauper and the public and the people and the prince. We were all limited to a world which was within the subcontinent, but we didn't know about the world outside. It is this world outside that we got to know because of the British and the French and the Portuguese who came to India. And we know what happened to the British and to the Portuguese and the French, though they stayed on for some time. The other thing that happened in India, the second thing that happened is that India, from being reportedly very rich economically, went down to a state of abject poverty because Shashi Tharoor keeps talking about this all the time, because the British usurped our resources and took it to their land, starting with cotton and muslin, starting from there to whatever money that could be available, took it to England, to, and we Indians, by the way, it's there in the book, there's a gentleman called Strachey. There were two Stracheys. One was a chap who sent, I think, Tilak to jail, and the other was another Strachey who was an ICS officer and who's written a book. I happened to come across a copy of this, but who says that India had to pay for our looking after India. I mean, that's the way the world looked at, that the British justified their presence in India. So, and at that time, how did they rule? We know, all of us in this room know about the divide and rule policy. I find it did exist. I mean, whatever little reading I've done of that. And therefore, we had this immense, think of this immense problem of two great religions jostling for space in a space where we have a much less space than China and many more people than China now. And this is where we are fighting each other because we need to establish our own position in this small, though it's a large country, sixth largest in the world, I think, but still make time for ourselves, make space for ourselves. What happened as a result? In 1925, let's say the Congress was started in 1885, the RSS was started in 1925, and in 1947, we had a time where the Congress of those days, I'm not a votary for the Congress today or in general, but the Congress pushed the country towards, thanks to Gandhi and other leaders, pushed the country towards civil disobedience movement, which gave us our own home rule demands and gave us independence post Second World War. But the RSS did not take part in the movement for independence, to the best of my understanding, whatever little I've read. And there's so little that one reads when there's so much to read. But given that situation, suddenly, 100 years down the line, we have, using that process, a system by which the RSS-controlled government has taken over the management of our land in a sort of a religious mode. I'm not going to say entirely that we are a Hindu nation. We are not. And it's going to be very difficult for us to become a purely Hindu nation. But there is that aspect. On the other hand, what comes in parallel is a question of management of the economy, of poverty. We were getting out of poverty in Manmohan Singh's time, 271 million people pulled out of poverty according to international standards, and in 10 years' time. But today, partly because of COVID, but partly for other reasons, we seem to be slipping back into economic despair. And that's something maybe we can discuss a little bit as we go along. What happens to this issue of poverty? Poverty is totally the opposite of the life of the rich, which is what India seems to get into now. The way a particular lifestyle develops, and I'm not going to go into details at this stage, is called corporatism. It was a phrase that was used by Mussolini, that is the corporate viewpoint. I have nothing against corporates. There are corporates who do a lot for the people, but corporatism is a slightly different concept, and it has its political stance, and that is important. Today, therefore, we have to go into a very difficult scenario where I don't know how to put it. Is it a question of right versus left? When 70 years ago, when we had the right in Europe, Germany for that matter, pushing out against Russia, which was the left, but then the Gulag and the German Auschwitz were very similar in many ways. So it's not that one is good and the other is bad. These terminologies are not appropriate, especially in a context where so complex and so complicated ways exist for looking at the world around us that it is difficult to see what we are going through. But, and this has happened much after the book was written, day before yesterday, by the way, I think Lekha mentioned 166 years because she has stretched it from 2020, which is the last date in the book, to 2023, which is today. But frankly, and thank you for mentioning that, Lekha, because the issue that comes up today is day before yesterday, 28th of May, and we know why 28th of May is important in this country now. But we do have a monarchical system almost. It's not correct to say monarchical. We are not a monarchy, but it's an amazing way that the party in power over 9 years has used constitutional means or abused constitutional means to reach a certain level of control of this country where 31% of the people have, or 30% of the people have ended up controlling 100% of the people. Is that control possible? Is it happening? Is it not happening? Where maybe at the end of it, when we discuss things, we'll see how to look at these issues. These are issues that these are difficult things, and I'm not sure how we can do. That's why when I wrote the book, I hoped it would be read and discussed by people like us. Thank you so much. Jayna, would you like to take over at the moment, or?
Maybe I'll. Paronjoy, would you like to go next? Why don't you go next? Because I think as a publisher.
Then you can take this also. Actually, there is one for it.
Actually, a little while ago, Sri Abhijit Sengupta alleged that I was tearing my hair. He had made me tear my hair. He has more hair on his head than mine. And I actually ended up making him tear his hair. And we had these heated arguments about where opposite should be used or where I bit should be used. And we sort of collaborated and colluded and contradicted each other. And finally, you have a book which is there in your hand. And as a publisher, I'd request all of you not only to buy it, but to pass it on to others, especially young people, because it is meant for young people. As Abhijit Babu was talking, several thoughts, random, unconnected, disconnected, flew through my brain. And I'd just like to share a few things with all of you here and thank Abhijit Babu. He was a Babu. I stayed very far away from the civil service. But I should thank him for putting this book together for young people, millennials. And at some point of time, in the not too distant future, I do believe this book should be translated into different languages and read by a much wider readership than all of us who are assembled here in the Bangalore International Center. As a part-time teacher, I often have some difficulty in explaining to young people what's the difference between a state language and a national language. And large numbers of young people, especially many who have grown up and continue to grow up in WhatsApp University, to use Ravish Kumar's memorable phrase, they don't know the difference. They do not know that India has 21 national languages, excluding the language I'm speaking to you in. They do not know that India is the only country in the world with 17 languages on its currency notes and 4 other languages that can be used for official purposes. They're part of the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India. They don't know why there's 17 in the currency note and 21 in the 8th schedule in terms of common scripts. And at a time when there are strenuous attempts being made in the name of unity, in the name of patriotism, in the name of nationalism, to ram down this a kind of monolithic idea of India, that the book that Sri Sengupta has written becomes all the more important. Because it celebrates our diversity, our plurality, our heterogeneity. It says this is our strength. Whereas there are some people who are trying to make it out as if it's our weakness. So it's very important, not only in that sense, but that it takes a very, very broad sweep of contemporary history from 1857 and a little before that, all the way till now. And I should mention, as a matter of fact, that the longest chapter in the book is about हमारे माननीय प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी. I don't always agree with him. As a publisher, I tell him I don't agree with you. But this is his book. He says we are close to a monarchical system. He says we are not yet a Hindu Rashtra. Let me argue that we are today closest to a Hindu Rashtra than we've ever been. I could argue that Islamophobia is at its peak today in comparison to where it was 80 years ago. Unlike Abhijit Babu's father, my father spent some time in jail during the Quit India movement. My parents came from East Bengal, now Bangladesh, to West Bengal in the late 30s and the early 40s. I do seriously believe in certain respects, especially relations between the majority community and the minority community, we've regressed 80 years. I was born in 55. I'm much younger than him. But I grew up with stories about the Great Bengal Famine, the Second World War, the Great Calcutta Killings. He evocatively recalls many of these episodes in our recent history. He talks about the different strands of the freedom movement. My father's older brother was thrown out of his house when my grandfather found a revolver under his pillow. Today, we are in an India where textbooks are being rewritten. Entire chapters are being deleted. When the guru of the assassin of the father of the nation, even though he denied his association with him when Nathuram Godse was being tried, we are living in that India. We are living in an India where Golwalkar said that the 3 biggest enemies of the Hindus of Bharatvarsh are Muslims, Christians, and communists. He said it. we are going back in time as we look ahead. I do seriously believe that a lot of young Indians don't even know that there are more Muslims in India than in all but two countries in the world. And even that second country, we're not very sure if it has a higher population than the number of Muslims in this country. I congratulate him for dedicating his book to the women of Shaheen Bagh, to the Muslim women of Shaheen Bagh, at a time when 1 out of 7 Indians have been told you have to exist as second-class citizens. And they still say, Kagaz nahi dikhayenge. My first contact with that, the song you heard before we started this function this evening, Dhano Dhanno Pushpe Bhora Amader ei Boshuntara, তাহার মাঝে আছে দেশ এক সকল দেশের সেরা, সে যে স্বপ্ন দিয়ে তৈরি, সে যে স্মৃতি দিয়ে ঘেরা, এমন দেশটি কোথাও খুঁজে পাবে না কো তুমি, সকল দেশের রানী সে যে আমার জন্মভূমি. Every Bengali child grew up with this song. And then this song metamorphosed. It became a bitter satire for everything that had gone wrong with our country. I remember taking my friends to see a group of street theater artists. And as this song was going on, they would be talking about all that was wrong in our society, the poverty, the illiteracy, the abysmal access to healthcare. And this song became a very, very bitter satire of where we are not. In that sense, we are going back in time, I know. Year after next, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh turns a century old. What will happen before that, your guess could be as good as mine. We live in a post-truth generation. We live in a post-truth world where what is true and what is not, what is fake and what is real has morphed. We are today in a country of 140 crore people, and in most parts of India, not just Bangalore, even outskirts of Karnataka, there are more SIMs, SIM, subscriber identity modules, than human beings. And I'm very happy that in Abhijit Babu's book, there are references to what is happening today. No, he's not a professional historian. And this book, at least to me, is very, very important simply because it is not written by a professional historian. And yes, we have an entire generation of people for whom reading has become difficult if it's not on a screen. Ask them to not look at their mobile phone for 24 hours. Their hands might start shaking like an alcoholic deprived of his glass of whiskey in the evening. And you ask them, what will you do for 24 hours? Read a book. Listen to music. Take a walk. We have an entire generation of people. So it's important that this book, and through this book, you reach out to them. The difference between India and China is obvious. We are the two most populous countries on planet Earth. Between the two countries, we have 40% of the population. The difference is the median age. The median age of India is about 28, some would say 29. In China, it's 38 and 39. Therefore, it's all the more important in today's day and age to try and reach out to the half of this country that is below the age of 28 and 29. And I'm thankful that I've been given the honor and the privilege of publishing Abhijit Babu's book. And he's trying to reach out to those in his grandchildren and his children. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak here. Over to you, Jayna.
Thank you, Paronjoy, and thank you, Abhijit, for asking me to also be part of this panel and response and to really respond to your book. When Abhijit first actually sent me the draft of the book, the manuscript of the book, way before it was released, it was to check whether he would be sent to jail after the book was written. Is there anything, any disclaimer that I can write? Will I be sued for contempt? Will I be charged with sedition? And that was my first job. And anyway, it's anybody's guess whether any of that is going to happen. I don't think so. But yeah, so
May I interrupt? Today, in some places, you can you can be charged with sedition for not even having
said or done anything.
Yeah, said or not even having said anything. So it's all right. No, yeah.
So yeah, so that was my first intro to the book. But then so I was just kind of flipping it for that. But I have now a far more, nuanced response to it. I would first like to say that it was, a history book, but an extremely contemporary, relatable, and interesting, and in that sense, easy and engaging book to read. I mean, I found it really engaging, and I mean, I think it would be a book which kind of captures contemporary history, especially for younger people, and therefore far less daunting than a traditional history book. And so I found that, I mean, though I was familiar with many of the chapters that he'd written about, it was extremely interesting for me because he had, unlike a traditional history book, referred to contemporary sources, referred to a lot of contemporary views about some issues, the debates about some of the topics and discussions. So I found that extremely interesting, and I think not only would it be interesting for young readers of any field, school, college children, but I think also very interesting for young lawyers especially, because I was, in fact, very, very pleasantly surprised to read so many references to legal cases throughout the chapters of the book. And I think for those who will read it, who've picked up the book, the cases really show, and I'm so glad that you picked them up and kind of wove them throughout the chapters, because many of these cases have not only shaped our constitutional history, but they have shaped our country. They have shaped the values of our country through the pronouncements on our constitution by our Supreme Court. And the history of the Supreme Court and our constitutional history cannot therefore be untied from the history of our country. It's such an integral part. And so I'm so glad that you kind of wove many of these cases in such an easy to read manner, because some of the cases that he referred to, I mean, unless you're a lawyer interested in constitutional law, or a law student, or perhaps a historian or a political scientist, you're not really going to go and read about many of these cases. And or sometimes even if you do try and read, the way a lot of our sources about these cases are extremely dense and technical. So it can be quite daunting, and people may not go into it too easily. And that's where the relevance of this is, because many of these cases are written in a very simplified way. It's not, it's made it easy for people to understand, and even the nuances, and gives some of the stories behind it. So it's not just, of course, the legal implication, but also how those cases came about. For example, the Keshav Nanda Bharati case, or the Indira Sawhney case. The fact that the Mandal Commission, Indira Sawhney was the Mandal Commission case. The Keshav Nanda Bharati case was the case in 73, where the Supreme Court for the first time held that we have the basic structure doctrine in our constitution, that how constitution can be amended only to the extent that the basic structure is not violated. And we have that doctrine, and the relevance of that doctrine is there even today, where attempts are being made to amend the constitution, and that's where the relevance of the basic structure doctrine still protects us and protects our constitution from being amended in such a way that its basic values of what define what is democracy, equality, judicial review are not violated, secularism are not violated. And similarly, the Mandal Commission case, which is actually known as the Indra Sawhney judgment, this happened after the Mandal Commission report and the riots and all of that took place. It was filed by a woman lawyer, Indra Sawhney, who went to court. I have met her a few times, and I've been fascinated as to what prompted her to file this case. Which has been a landmark in our country's history, which for the first time, gave the scope of reservations and how reservations can be implemented, and we're still Indra Sawhney has still stood ground, and for readers to read about this. That what led to this case, who filed it, how it was filed, all of that I think is fascinating reading. And some of the things, it was especially important to me because at the Center for Law and Policy Research, which I'm a part of, one of our initiatives has been a portal, if all of you are interested, called the Supreme Court Observer. And the Supreme Court Observer, what we try to do is fairly new. It's from the last 7 to 8 years. What we try and do is try and cover some of the most important cases and decisions of the Supreme Court which impact public life. And we try and write about these cases in an easy, plain language manner so that anybody can read about them, can go back to sources if they need it. But the reason we kind of set up the Supreme Court Observer is to really say that cases decided by our Supreme Court have an impact on our daily lives, and we should engage with them. And Abhijit has referred to the Supreme Court Observer, so thank you for that as well.
It's a tremendous source of information for us, for those who want to read.
Yeah, so thank you, and we tried to do that. So, so many of these early constitutional cases have been referred to extremely, in easy to understand way in your book, and I totally enjoyed that. The Ram Janmabhoomi dispute, the Ayodhya case, all of that has been kind of woven in with the historical developments. I was just wondering, I don't know whether I've missed it because I did read substantial parts of the book, so I don't know whether I have missed it, but whether I felt a few portions which could perhaps have been added or referred to, which make a very important part of our historical development is on caste. And one of the initial cases was Champakam Durai Rajan, where in the 50s and the 60s, where a Brahmin woman goes to court challenging the fact that the communal reservation system in Tamil Nadu, which gives reservation on the basis of caste. And finally, our court rules, the Supreme Court rules, this was before the amendment to Article 15, the court rules that this amounted to caste discrimination, despite the fact that it was to favor backward castes and the other oppressed castes. And finally, she, I think, did manage to get a seat.
May I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
I'm going through the index, castes. It is referred to in over 50 pages. Maybe not the specific judgment.
This case,
the case is an important case.
I have not referred to.
So,
and frankly, I must admit there are lots of gaps. So anybody who has suggestions later on also, I'd be most happy to hear.
So no, this was just one
No, but this is a
minor
good point.
observation,
This is a good point.
and it led to constitutional amendments. But anyway, so just a small observation, and then the book moves on to a lot more of the contemporary legal issues on privacy, the recent challenges using Section 124A on sedition law, the use of the UAPA against human rights defenders, which we are seeing over the last few years. The CAA protests and the CAA, which was introduced, and all of that. And so the contemporary kind of legal history and what has happened over the last few years, I think, has been extremely important. And many of these cases are an integral part of it. We're still kind of seeing that many of these are not decided. CAA has not been decided. It's pending. There is now a challenge to Section 124A, which we'll have to see how that works out. And so in that sense, I felt, extremely current. You have the history books which talk about early history, modern history to some extent, but not really contemporary history, if you can call it. Today's history over the last maybe 25 years. And I think so that's an extremely, extremely important reading, and how it can complement our current history references. And so I feel that some of this would be extremely important for younger readers in different age groups, and maybe you should have another session with younger people and to see what their responses are to the book. And also I feel, while we have, your writings, especially ending with the last 10 years, I think the last 9 years, I think the biggest chapter is based on that, and the developments of the last 9 years. I think despite all of this and the present times that we're living in, I think there still is a sense, at least I feel that as a constitutional lawyer, spending my time in court, the strength of our constitution shows that we have made strides that a lot of other countries haven't. And there still is that hope that we have, the strength of our constitution, the strength of our courts, despite the present times we live in. So I still have that hope with me. So leave you to that.
I'm so glad that Jayna has hope, because a lot of people, I think, I'm really impressed. I mean that with all seriousness, and not a jot, not an iota of sarcasm in that. I mean that because it takes lawyers like her to be able to resolve issues, legal issues for we Indians, hoping, though, at the same time, that the Supreme Court of India accepts habeas corpus and does not stop. I think it was Arun Mishra or somebody who said, habeas corpus Article 32, we should try and get rid of these concepts. I'm misquoting actually, but was not very positive about some of the articles of our faith, as we should call it. So it is a very difficult time when the Constitution is getting churned. One of the things which I tried to do is to write a chapter on the Constitution of India in this very higgledy-piggledy book. There's a book that Poiri has written, which is where the title is higgledy-piggledy. It's with publishers now. I hope it gets published. But that is the way India has become, is the most complicated
country in the world to govern. And I remember in school, when we were young kids, we were told that the most difficult job in the world is that of the Prime Minister of India. Now, given that difficulty, I don't know whether we still continue to have the most difficult job in the world or the easiest job in the world, where we don't answer our citizens. It's a very different way of looking at this world. I have just one or two small comments to make before I close, and then maybe my colleagues can say a little more, and then we can open it up for questions. There is time, I think. We do have time. One of the things I tried to do, and this is which a colleague of mine told me, that I was trying to be truthful in reflecting what other people have said. As I said, there's some 950 footnotes, and they're all journalistic writings, almost all of it, except for a few comments here and there. But that is because, there was this person in the US who was the president of New York Times or Washington Post, who said that journalism is the first draft of history. Now, in today's world, how will you know what is the history of our land? You can only know it by looking at what the newspapers say and keep copies of those articles if you can. The point is, what paper do you read? What channel do you watch? Do you watch the Republic, or do you watch one of the other channels in this system? What is it that gives us the truth to our land? It's a very difficult thing to do, and for people like us to be able to put aside prejudices and try and find the correct way forward is very difficult. It is something that we need to practice, actually. But I think that is something what our education system, for those of us who grew up then, possibly have a strength in. Today's youngsters don't really know, because it's very easy for us to tell them something and they will accept because they think that you're telling the truth. And that is a very serious problem. That is why I tried to write this book in a slightly simple way. Not that I was capable of writing anything more complicated or complex. It's very convenient to say it's written for the younger generation. But I do hope the younger people today, most of the people here are above 40 years old. I wish we could have a session somewhere where nobody is above 40 years old. That would be the right way to go about it for me. Maybe Ravi can have a session sometime, but that would be the way to do it. It's a question of, it's difficult. It's very difficult to try and tell people, this is what I saw. This is what I have gone through. This is what I studied in school and college. But if I have to say what I studied in the British history textbooks about India, God, I mean, I find it most amazing to think that we went through all that stuff. So this is why this book, and I do hope you read it. Why don't you, Paronjoy, something to add?
No, it's important that those of you here who are in touch with young people, who are associated with educational institutions, young adults, their groups, if you can organize discussions with Abhijit Babu, I think that would be a good way forward. As a publisher, I have a vested interest in trying to ensure as many people read the book and buy the book as possible. And of course, if we can get it out in different languages. Now, I don't have the resources at this juncture to bring it out, but I do seriously believe it should come out in several languages, and I'll welcome your ideas and thoughts about how this can be achieved under the circumstances. Jayna, I think you should speak. I may say things which are indiscreet, and I will unabashedly promote the book, and I can unabashedly promote something that's happening tomorrow, and all of you are welcome. Without Abhijit Babu and the BIC's permission, please come tomorrow to St. Joseph's College of Law. Abhijit Babu had the good fortune of having Jayna to legally vet his manuscript. I was not so lucky. I'm the only citizen of India against whom your favorite oligarch, his lawyers have instituted 6 cases of defamation that are currently pending in different courts of law. More about that tomorrow.
Paronjoy, you should hire me as your lawyer.
Will you work for me free?
I think.
Will you work for me free?
No.
There you go. There you go.
No.
She wants it both ways, right? Publicity. She wants name and fame and fortune, but also fortune. Can't have both. Sorry, Jayna. Hard luck.
Look at that.
No.
You have to appoint an attorney
Attorney to plead.
Yeah. No, that was just on a lighter note. But what I want to say is, I think in addition to really promoting the book amongst different younger audiences, I think this is also a book that could really be used at introductory levels in law colleges. In law schools, in the first, second year, when we do have a section, or we do have actually a course on legal history. And I think this would make really good reading in addition to the prescribed texts. And, so I think that way some of the kind of contemporary legal history, I have colleagues working with me who are in their early 20s, mid-20s. Many of them, and I don't blame them. I don't blame any of the younger lawyers because, now it's all on, even our databases are all online, right? Many of the younger lawyers don't even read the case books in book form.
Yes.
And even when you read online, you just search the keywords, because our judgments are 700, 500,000 words, 1,000 pages, sorry. And so nowadays, who wants to sit and read 500 pages, right? So they just look for keywords and kind of look for precedents. And so, cases like, while it is a big challenge for them to read even cases, the judgments, which as lawyers it's mandatory reading, Keshavananda Bharati or Indra Soni, the judgment. Indra Soni judgment is 700 pages. And, but at least I think writings like this would make them interested as to how they fitted in within our historical development, how these cases fitted in. Why did these cases emerge? Why were they filed? And, how did these cases come about? And hopefully with that kind of introduction in the early 1 or 2 years of law school, maybe
if I may, again, disagree with you. My son is studying to be a lawyer, hopefully not a liar, as they would pronounce it in North India.
Why are you looking at me while saying that?
Okay. Because she didn't agree to work for me free, that's all.
I didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that, okay. No, what I want to say about young people is that, yes, they may not be reading on pieces of paper. Unlike senior citizens, including me, we still love the touch and feel of paper. Abhijit Babu was talking about which newspaper do you read? Do you read the Deccan Chronicle or the Deccan Herald or the Times of India? But the younger generation, they actually have access to many, many more sources of information. And I do seriously believe that, we keep hearing about this short attention span, and that's where I disagree with. On a serious note, catchphrases. They read, not on pieces of paper. They read on the screen. And it's your ability to tell, its ability to relate, the narrative, the way you tell your story, that holds your reader's attention. So that's where I think Abhijit Babu has done a great job in, as you think, culling information from a very diverse range of sources, which are inherently, some of them are very prosaic, even boring, to tell to tell a story, to tell a narrative of our times and our country. And I think that is really the strength of the book.
Shall we put it open out? If I think we have half an hour left, and I didn't think I'd be sort of, having to do this because it's a tough job. Saying any questions, please ask.
And
Between the three of us,
because
we'll
it's
try and
being
answer.
recorded for posterity, please remember that everything you say will be available on YouTube day after tomorrow. It'll be immortalized. And you're welcome to, it would be good if you sort of just mentioned your name and addressed the question to our author here.
The name, mentioning of the name is useful because then we can try and put it in place. And everybody else knows what's being asked, who's asking.
Anybody with questions, you're welcome to go to the mic.
My name is Debashish Mitra. I live in Bhubaneswar. I happen to have been visiting Bangalore, and I picked up on our Stephanian group that this event was on today, so I made it a point to come. Because I'm actually also writing a book called The Tale of the Three Partitions, with a focus on Bengal. So I'm curious to know, why did you say modern India from 1857? What was modern about India in 1857? Was it the same India that we're talking about right now in 47? So what made you pick that?
That's a good question. There was a point at which to start. There were two ways of doing it. One is start at 1947, and then you miss out all the great effort that we Indians made, our elders and seniors made before 1947. So where do you go? You go to 1925, you go to 1885. When do you go? 1857 has, if you read the book, and I hope you will,
I'm hoping you'll autograph the copy I buy.
Sorry?
I said, I'm hoping you'll autograph the copy I'll buy after this.
I will certainly autograph it. If my signature can help Paronjoy to sell a copy, great. I'm so happy about that. No, but on a more serious note, 1857 is considered, it's interesting, I think it was Savarkar who called it the first war of independence. It's also the point at which some things happened which brought one set of Indians together to fight a foreign power. In some manner, it's not a very easy thing. 1857 is not the ideal moment. In terms of wars of independence, there was the Vellore independence movement effort one day in the Vellore fort. There was a Paika Bidroha in Orissa, which you would know about. And there were one or two others also around that time.
Quite a few, about 6 or 7 of them, but that's not relevant.
Yeah, so there were all those, but those are small things. It was this which went on for a few months.
Could I then interrupt you for a moment and ask, because in my research, in fact, probably the lady, since she was pointing out so many important aspects about law, that Ram Mohan Roy and his work on abolishing sati, there was a distinct legal process that was prevalent in India where you could petition. There was a viceroy who would listen. There was a parliament in Britain that would then decide. And then that would become law and get implemented. So if you look at the process of how laws were made, and something so important and fundamental as sati. In fact, to me, I think the law abolishing sati was more important than getting our freedom in 47. Right? I mean, can you imagine getting freedom in 47 and sati being allowed? It would have been an appalling situation. But having said that, so I'm just curious about, if you look at when laws in India got constructed in a manner where you transition from the Mughal era to the British era, when they were, say, personal law, Muslim personal law, criminal law. I mean, if you look at that particular period, and then you pick that as a thread coming into now, Was that something that was in
Yes,
your mind?
certainly. It
Or
is
was 1857 because of its nature of a revolt against an outside force, which actually gave us a legal system? What was
Yes,
the difference
18,
between the two?
exactly that. That's the next point I would have said. 1858, when Queen Victoria proclaimed herself the Empress of India, was the starting point of proclamatory, I'm creating a word for the moment, legal systems where an announcement was made. Even today, by the way, you will need somewhere in Vidhan Saudha over here or somewhere a gazette notification which will have to say such and such a thing has happened, such and technically we don't go by the gazette anymore, but we ought to. Government has to tell you what has happened. That's one side of it. But with the British, every 20 years, and this is, I've mentioned that in the book, there are laws, acts that they brought in,
Charters also.
which created a movement towards a modern, and I would use the word modern in its best sense of the term, a modern system of legal management of a people, which started post 1858. Before that, in any case, the kings and the rulers and the nawabs of different parts of India did whatever they want. There was no commonality of law in India. That was when the first thing started. So
Is that right? I
thought
thought that
about it.
in British India, which was British governed India, there was one set of laws, and then there were, you know,
Yes.
where the principalities
Yes.
and everybody else was.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the societies were different.
Yes,
But I mean, could you sort of, for example, not implement sati in some part of India and do it in the others? I don't think that was the case, or was it?
see, since you mentioned sati, I have just one point, and I'll ask Jayna to add to that. Sati was not removed by the British as a great act. The Portuguese and the French in India had, I understand, and I haven't gone into this in detail, but I believe they had already removed sati. There are some princes, this is what I've heard in my random reading, but I'm not sure about that, so please don't hold me to this. Some of them had actually stopped sati. Now, I don't know, but on the other hand, thanks to the British influence in Bengal, or what was then Bengal, you had people like Ram Mohan Roy, who, by the way, Ram Mohan Roy comes into this book also as expected. I mean, in a book of this size type, a couple of paragraphs. But the Sati movement came about, the Brahmo Samaj happened. There's a list of all the Brahmo Samajis who developed Bengal those days. It's a very nebulous, how shall I put it, a very, very difficult way to explain why it was in Bengal, because the British went and stayed in Bengal. They built Fort William, and ultimately that was the starting point of many of the legal systems of India. I don't know whether you would like to add something or
No,
say
if I
something.
can briefly add something for the benefit of my old college mate, Mr. Debashish, is that it's right up front in the book, page 12, about Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the abolition of sati and the Bengal sati regulation, which was passed on the 4th of December, 1829. How do I know? He didn't want an index. I insisted that the book should have an index.
Well done.
So it was very easy for me to find the pages.
So there you
Yeah,
are.
I
So
must
you
thank
answered-
him for that. Now that I'll tell you about that
Very good.
maybe at some other time.
No, but I just want to just briefly respond. You're absolutely right. I think legislation like the Sati Abolition Act and many other early legislations, yes, they were made by the British. Of course, there's a history to how these legislations were brought about, and many of them were made, centrally before independence. At the same time, there were some legislations by the provinces and by the states. So both were existing, and I think, in fact, legal history of this kind itself is so important, because I mean, you can have a whole, a book on just legislative legal history, and that is such an integral part of the struggles, the movements, the social movements that happened, which led to some of these legislations being passed. I mean, I guess.
आप लिख रहे हैं ना किताब?
I mean, I would love to if I get time and a publisher who's
Okay,
ready to
but-
publish
but-
it.
Sorry.
But I
I'm
really
always
think, if I may,
It depends on how much you want to include in.
if I may move from this a bit for a second, what you're talking about would make a remarkable book. And I would really recommend that you make time and write it. It's probably more important than those few hours in court where somebody else can do that, but not everybody will be able to write a book like this. And I know you can. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. I mean,
But-
I think the point you're making, which I would just like to weave one last aspect here, because when you talk about Mandal, you talk about Keshavananda Bharati, you talk about, basic fundamental rights of citizen, you talk about CA, you talk about Shaheen Bagh. I've been to Shaheen Bagh. I've stood with the farmers, in the borders of Delhi, etc., because that's my background. And I'm not a historian, and I'm writing a book called The Tale of Three Partitions, weaving back from 71, 47, and 1905. But when I went into 1905, I had to go to 1793 and then go to 1765. So the point I'm trying to make is that laws that are enacted in a social context of a particular kind, a socio-political context, a socio-religious context, that nature of the events around that and why those laws were enacted then tend to give you a sense of direction that should these things coalesce again, this is going to be the likely outcome. And I think India has a history of seeing these particular aspects. We've got divided, as a landmass into three different countries, all on three different trajectories, very similar people, same sets of issues, dealing with it differently, but somehow we've built, glass houses around ourselves, which are not true, because at the end of the day, your roots are the same. So the point I was trying to get to was, that's why I asked about 1857, because I'm right now moving from 1765 and coming forward all the way to 1971 and beyond. So that was the reason I picked that. But thank you very much for your answers. Most appreciated. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. So my name is Rohini Srihari. I'm certainly not a professor of history. I am a professor of computer science and AI, which has its own issues, but I find your talk very interesting. And my question was sort of general. The issues you seem to be talking about are generally what we call illiberalism, I think. And so my question was, are these issues that you're focusing on like very specific to the Indian context, or do you think this is just part of a general worldwide trend of, countries moving to the right and taking extreme positions and so on? I just wanted your thoughts on that. And I also wanted to compliment the lawyer, the constitutional lawyer. I think people like you are holding up democracy all over the world, so thank you.
Shall I try and answer that quickly? Well, 3 days back, you also had the Turkish president returning to power with a very, very doubtful majority. Now, we also know that, I don't think no is the right word, but there are times, maybe what cycle, I am not an expert, somebody who's a historian may actually study that. Is there a cycle where the right overcomes the left, and then suddenly you have something equivalent of the left that comes forward? The left and the right came out of the speaker's chair in France. So we don't even know how to look at these issues. But yes, there are difficulties in judging what the rest of the world is. There are people who are known to be right-wing politicians, or considered in a loose sense of the term as right-wing politicians. You do have what again, may allow me to use it as in a loose
term, but we have a right-wing government in India that has said today, you have a left-wing government in Kerala, supposedly, the CPM government, but where these meet, I don't know. What's the difference between one and the other?
May I add something to what you're saying?
Yeah.
You know, it's not easy to find these trends and currents, because every time you think you have found the trend, you are likely to be pointed in a different direction. Out of the 200 countries on planet Earth, including several small island states in the Pacific, whose population is less than that of Indira Nagar. But I do seriously believe, to add to what Abhijit Babu is saying, you know, these notions of isms, communism, capitalism, socialism, left, right, these terms are evolving, and he referred to Erdogan. Trump still doesn't believe he lost the election. Bolsonaro is, where is he? In Florida. Lula won by how much? 1% of the vote? Where is Duterte today? So, you know, again, examples, counter cases. Our neighbor Pakistan, Imran Khan, what will happen if he's let out of jail? I'm tempted to quote one of my favorite singers who was given a Nobel Prize. In the mid-60s, a song, My Back Pages, last few lines. Good and bad, I defined these terms as if so clear somehow. But I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman.
Okay, thank you. I'll just quote my father, who was an expert in Indian history and all of that. And his favorite line was, "The pendulum always swings." You know, so let's hope.
I think you've answered it. Jayna, you wanted to say something?
Please, sir. He has a question for you, sir.
You can ask from there, yeah? Pardon? You can ask
Please
from
go
there
ahead.
itself.
Is it all right if I sit down now?
Yes,
Okay.
Speak into the microphone.
Yeah. I am more than 80, so I may ramble a bit, so pardon me for that. I had read the manuscript form of Abhijit's book. I may not remember everything what I have read, but with reference to this question of why 1857, Abhijit explained that 1858 Victoria's proclamation came, and after that we had probably some sort of a modern form of government in this country. Before that, the country was ruled by a corporate. East India Company was a company which was ruling this country, 1757 partly, then larger part of India till 1857. In 1857 or 1858, with the proclamation of Victoria, some sort of a sovereign power, maybe from abroad, replaced the corporate rule. In that sense, it can be said that it was some form of modernization, that instead of a corporate rule, you had British Crown ruling. I can quote a sentence from Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's story about Mahesh, a cow, which was reared by Gafur, a landless agriculture labor probably. His one sentence to a Brahmin of that village, if I remember correctly, is Maharanir Rajatte Keu Karo Golam Noy. In the rule of Queen Victoria, nobody is anybody else's slave. That self-confidence, a said landless labor could have during the rule by a crown instead of a rule by the company. Now that rule of law may not be, or equality before law may not have been there at that time between white and a brown man. The rule of law may be weighed in favor of the white man, but at least some rule of law or equality before law among the brown people was established probably for the first time. Instead of a feudal rule in many parts of the country and companies rule from 1757 to 1857, some sort of a rule of law under a crown, a sovereign power was established. In that sense, there is point in Abhijit's choosing 1857 or 1851 as the point from where modern history starts. I'd like to add one or two sentences, then stop. Abhijit referred to, Paronjoy referred to Ram Mohan Roy, I think, and Abhijit also talked about Ram Mohan Roy. And then came the question of Brahmo Samaj. Now, to what extent Brahmo Samaj led the Indian Renaissance, or whatever you call it. There's a lot of debate about it. I think first our Presidency College historian, Sushobhan Sarkar, a very eminent Marxist historian, wrote about it. Then his son, Sumit Sarkar of Delhi University, he wrote about it. And I think the general feeling was that Brahmo Samaj was more an elitist movement, and it did not really percolate to the people below the upper middle class and all that. So you can have discussion or debate about after the so-called Bengal Renaissance, how modernism came to the country through other forces. I'll last point refer to both Paronjoy, myself, and probably Abhijit's father belong to a district called Barishal. There are two historians produced by that district. One is Tapan Rai Chaudhuri, who was an economic historian in Delhi School of Economics and Oxford University. Another, I didn't know that, the person who died recently, Ranojit Guha. He is supposed to be one of the builders of or makers of subaltern history. In that subaltern history, he has written about many revolutions and many, what shall I say, modernist ideas, etc., thrown by the subaltern class, not the rich, not the upper middle class, but those who are below that class, uneducated people, women who didn't have benefit of education, and farmers, santals, etc., etc. Probably their role in modernizing Indian society, making it an equal society, etc., could be written or discussed, because those people have stopped writing, I believe. Ranajit Guha and the subaltern school have now, he's dead, of course, but those who are writing today's history, they could continue that trend of writing, etc. My last question is, this is about today's developments or yesterday's developments, etc. I understand some sons of Ram Mandir have also joined force with the president of the Indian Wrestling Federation, who is facing charges of molestation of our gold and silver medal winners, including a girl who was underage. this Wrestling Federation man, he has threatened that he will start an agitation for abolition or amendment of POSCO law. I understand some sadhus, sons, or whatever you call them, of Ram temple want to join them. How have we come to this state of affairs? I am terribly angry. Where are we going?
Abhijit Babu.
May I suggest to, from all three of us and to all of you sitting there, that there is no better point, and there's no point in trying to even answer this question that Mr. Bhattacharya has raised. It is perhaps on this note of disquiet that we need to close this discussion. We have seen the wrestlers fighting. These are people who have brought laurels to this country, and we have seen them on the streets, and the Delhi police has been sort of attacking them, literally, physically, including men attacking women. These are things that I never thought in my lifetime I would see in India. It has happened. Why it has happened is something that needs to be written about, and maybe I can only hope that someone like Jayna would write a legal history of India. It is not too much has been written. And in that hope, I don't know where we are going, Bipulda. I'm not very sure. Where are we going? I really don't know. Maybe a year from now we'll know where we have gone.
It'll be less than a year, Abhijit Babu.
Well,
Before
1
you
year
know.
it'll take. Yeah,
And if I may briefly interject, sir.
It's about a year from now.
That's
Let's
right.
see. And anyway.
If I may briefly interject,
Yeah.
there are enough angry old men here. We want angry young women and men too, who are as outraged, as angry as you and I are.
Yeah, no, with some persuasion, I managed to get my 17-year-old boy to come and listen to this discussion, just like you were saying, sir, that we need enough angry men and women. And, he may be probably the only sub-18 person in this auditorium. Yeah, and I'm sure he's enjoyed it.
I'm there, sir.
Yes, of course, sir. Yeah. You are ever young. But so that is my question. That's the source of my question. That, what we need to do, because I am a professor of strategy at Xavier's. Yeah, and I deal with enough, I deal with 20 to 25-year-old men. That the issue is not that they are bought into one way of thinking or the other. The issue is their indifference. That they are really, a lot of them are not just bothered about some of these topics that are so important. So the issue is to capture their imagination, and that's why I must congratulate you for having written a book for, which is primarily targeted or could be utilized by the young generation. The whole idea is that how do we get enough pop culture to focus on these, whether it's books or movies or music. Just like in the US, right? There's a lot of popular imagination that gets fed in. So that is my question to you, all the three of you. Is there a way that we can actually do a lot more in India to capture popular imagination, especially of the youth?
Yes. Lots and lots more.
Yeah.
Any comment?
I think the book is part of that. It's really well written. If you've read it, it's very simply written. It's easy to read, but it gathers all the kind of nuances. So I think it's great reading for young people. We have to make them pick up the book and read it.
I'll make sure my son reads it.
With your permission,
Yes,
we'll close with this last comment. And this is what I have to say. It's with some difficulty that I wrote this. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, because there are others who probably didn't think of writing it like this. But I hope more and more people read these things. What is it that they can do? Well, for one, come forward. That is why this book was for the women of Shaheen Bagh. And I think those women, I wish I were in Delhi. but my wife and I went to one of these Shaheen Baghs of Bangalore, and what great, what remarkable positivity that we saw among them. And they fought.
Yeah.
It was only COVID that stopped it. Think of this. It is the million farmers of Haryana and UP and Punjab who got the present government to apologize.
Right.
This happens, it can happen. That pushback can happen. And I'm not trying to say this, I'm a bureaucrat or a former bureaucrat, so I'm not one of those who's capable of fighting in a with a pitchfork or whatever it is. But I hope someday we will all learn and do something about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And I want to thank all of you here. I want to thank the Bangalore International Center, and in particular, our author, Abhijit Babu. And I want to thank all of you here. The last word is yours.
No, I've finished. I thought you were taking the last word.
I think the book will make a lot of young men and women angry if they aren't already, and then hopefully take the work forward. So thanks for that.
Thank you, everybody.